Some of you are carrying burdens that were never meant for you to carry. You've been wrestling with worry, struggling with lack, and trying to figure it all out on your own. But I came to tell somebody today, God is your provider. You don't have to do this by yourself. You don't have to strive, stress, or stay up all night wondering how it's going to work out. Because when you put your needs in God's hands, He will make a way out of no way. There comes a time in life when you have to decide where your trust lies. Will you put your faith in what you see? Or will you believe in the God who works behind the scenes? Too often we measure our provision by the size of our paycheck, the stability of our economy, or the resources at our disposal. But God never called you to depend on temporary things. He is not limited by what is in your bank account. He is not confined by what the economy is doing. He does not need permission from your circumstances to bless you. He is God all by Himself, and He will make a way where there seems to be no way. When you understand that God is your source, you stop living in fear of losing what you have. You stop panicking when doors close. You stop worrying when people walk away. Because people are not your source, God is. Jobs come and go, opportunities rise and fall, seasons shift, but the hand of God remains steady. He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. The earth is His and the fullness thereof. There is nothing He cannot do, no door He cannot open, no need He cannot meet. Some of you have been looking at your situation thinking that as long as things remain the same, you will never get ahead. But God does not need ideal circumstances to bless you. He does not need the economy to turn in your favor. He does not need people to approve you. If He has to, He will send a raven to feed you, like He did for Elijah. If He has to, He will make manna fall from the sky like He did for the Israelites. If He has to, He will take 2 fish and 5 loaves and feed thousands. Because He is not limited by the systems of this world. He operates in a kingdom that is above every kingdom. And when you put your trust in Him, He will supply all your needs according to His riches in glory. Too many people are living with a scarcity mindset, afraid to step out, afraid to trust, afraid to believe. But faith is the currency of heaven. When you trust God, you unlock supernatural provision. When you stop clinging to what you can control and start leaning on His power, you will see Him move in ways that will blow your mind. He is the God who takes little and makes much. He is the God who opens doors no man can shut. He is the God who makes a way in the wilderness and streams in the desert. If you've been looking at your circumstances trying to figure out how God is going to do it, I came to tell you, stop trying to figure it out and start trusting Him. He is Jehovah Jireh, your provider. He is not just enough, He is more than enough. When you give your needs to Him, He will do exceedingly abundantly above all you could ask or think. Trust Him and watch Him provide. Faith is not just a word, it is a force. It is the bridge between where you are and where God is calling you to be. When you walk by faith, you step into the supernatural. You invite God to move in ways that defy logic, surpass expectations, and break limitations. Faith is not based on what you see, it is based on who God is. If you are waiting for everything to make sense before you trust Him, you will never experience a fullness of His power. Because faith is not about seeing first and then believing. It is about believing first and then seeing the manifestation of His hand. The Bible declares that without faith it is impossible to please God. That means faith is not an option, it is a necessity. It is the language of heaven. It is the key that unlocks the doors of provision, healing, breakthrough, and transformation. Every major move of God in the Bible was preceded by an act of faith. When the woman with the issue of blood reached out to touch the hem of Jesus' garment, it was not her desperation that healed her. It was her faith. When blind Bartimaeus cried out to Jesus, it was not his need that opened his eyes, it was his faith. When Peter stepped out of the boat, it was not the strength of the water that held him, it was his faith in the word that Jesus spoke. Many people are waiting on God, but what if God is waiting on you? Waiting on you to believe again, waiting on you to trust beyond what you can understand, waiting on you to take a step even when you can't see the whole staircase. Faith moves the hand of God. When you operate in faith, you declare to heaven that you are ready for what God has already prepared for you. Too often, people stand at the edge of a miracle, but fear holds them back. Fear says, what if it doesn't work? Faith says, what if it does? Fear says, what if I fail? Faith says, what if I fly? Fear keeps you in the boat. Faith causes you to walk on water. God is not moved by your complaints. He is moved by your confidence in him. He is not waiting for you to have it all figured out. He is waiting for you to trust him beyond what you can control. Faith is not passive. It requires action. When you step out in faith, heaven responds. Mountains move, chains break, doors open. What seemed impossible suddenly becomes possible because faith does not rely on human strength. It relies on divine power. If you want to see God move, you have to step out in faith. If you want to experience the supernatural, you have to stop looking at the natural. Faith is the access point to miracles. And when you activate your faith, you activate the hand of God. So believe, trust, step, and watch what he does next. There is power in surrender. The world teaches us to hold on tightly to what we have, to fight for what we deserve, and to secure our future by our own strength. But God calls us to a different way of living, a way that involves letting go, releasing control, and trusting him to be our provider. When we surrender, we stop trying to make things happen in our own strength. We stop striving, stressing, and forcing doors open. Instead, we let go and allow God to step in and do what only he can do. Surrender is not a sign of weakness, it is a declaration of faith. It's an acknowledgement that we are not in control, but God is. It's an act of humility, saying, Lord, I trust that your way is better than my way, that your timing is better than my timing, and that your plan is greater than my plan. When we surrender, we create space for God to move. We open the door for him to step in and take over. He doesn't force himself into our lives. He waits for us to willingly invite him to do what he knows is best. There are things that we hold on to so tightly, our dreams, our plans, our desires, and we think that if we let go, we'll lose everything. But God doesn't work on the principles of scarcity. He works in the overflow. When we surrender our lives to him, he takes what we give and multiplies it beyond our wildest imagination. The widow who gave all she had 2 small coins, didn't lose anything. She gained the favor and blessing of God. The little boy who gave his 5 loaves and 2 fish didn't go without. He became the vessel through which thousands were fed. God is a multiplier. When we surrender, he takes what seems small and insignificant and turns it into something extraordinary. Surrender also means letting go of control over our fears, doubts, and anxieties. We often think that by holding on to these things, we're protecting ourselves, but in reality, they are holding us back. Fear tells us to worry about the future, to calculate every move, to anticipate failure. But faith says, trust God with the unknown. Surrender the fear of what could happen and believe that he is already in your tomorrow. When you let go of fear and allow God to take the reins, he steps in and provides peace that passes understanding, joy in the midst of trials, and assurance that everything is in his hand. When we surrender, we're not giving up, we're giving in to God's will, which is always better than our own. It's when we stop fighting against his plan and begin flowing with his purpose that we experience true provision. God does not need us to control the outcome. He needs us to trust him with the process. The more we surrender, the more we align ourselves with his will. And in that alignment, we experience the fullness of his provision spiritually, emotionally, financially, and relationally. In surrender, we find the freedom that comes from trusting God completely. It's when we let go that we discover that everything we need has already been provided by a loving Father who knows exactly what we require, exactly when we need it. Surrender is the key that unlocks his provision. And when we release our grip, he is free to move in ways that we could never imagine. God's timing is not like our timing. We live in a world governed by clocks and calendars where everything is measured, planned, and scheduled. We want things to happen when we want them to happen, and if they don't, we start to doubt, question, or grow frustrated. But God is not bound by time. He is outside of time, and his sense of timing is perfect in ways that we often cannot understand. His timing is not just about the when, but the how and the why. We are creatures of urgency, constantly pushing to get ahead, to arrive at the destination, to reach the next milestone. But God's timing is not about rushing. It's about preparing. It's about molding us, shaping us, and growing our faith in the process. You may want the breakthrough right now, and it may feel like you've been waiting forever. But know this, God is working behind the scenes, aligning everything for your good. His timing is not late, it is perfect. We get so caught up in the urgency of our desires that we forget God is setting up the right circumstances for the right season. It's easy to think that because we haven't received what we've asked for yet, God is ignoring us. But in reality, he is setting us up for something greater than we could imagine. There are moments where we might not be ready for what he has in store, or there might be people, places, or things that need to align before we can fully step into the fullness of his plan for us. Think about Abraham. God promised him that he would be the father of many nations, but it took years for that promise to be fulfilled. There were seasons of waiting, seasons of doubt, and seasons when it seemed like the promise would never come. Yet in the fullness of time, when Abraham was finally ready, when everything had been arranged just as it needed to be, God delivered. His timing was perfect even when it seemed delayed. Even Jesus, the Son of God, waited for the perfect time to step into his purpose. His ministry did not begin until he was 30, even though he could have begun earlier. He waited for the appointed time. In the same way, there are times in our lives when God asks us to wait, not because he is withholding, but because he is preparing us, building our capacity, and aligning our hearts with his will. When we trust in God's timing, we embrace the truth that he knows the end from the beginning. What might seem like a delay is often a divine preparation. Trusting in his timing means letting go of our own agendas and embracing the season we are in right now, knowing that God is faithful to bring everything together in the perfect moment. God's timing is not only perfect, it's purposeful. Every season, every delay, every waiting period serves a greater purpose in shaping us and positioning us for what is to come. When you trust God's timing, you stop rushing, you stop stressing, and you start resting in his sovereignty. His plan is always worth the wait. Obedience is often misunderstood. Many see it as a burden or restriction or something that limits freedom. But in God's kingdom, obedience is the pathway to blessings. It is not about following rules for the sake of rules. It is about trusting in God's plan even when we don't fully understand it. When we obey God, we align ourselves with his will, and that alignment opens the door to divine favor, provision, and protection. In the natural world, we are taught that rewards come through hard work, striving, and often through manipulation or control. But God's economy works differently. In his kingdom, obedience is the currency that unlocks his blessings. When we obey, we say, God, I trust you more than I trust my own understanding. This act of trust invites God to step in and work on our behalf in ways that we could never accomplish on our own. The Bible is full of stories that demonstrate the power of obedience. Take Abraham, for example. God told him to leave his homeland, to leave everything familiar and go to a place he had never seen. Abraham could have questioned, resisted, or held back, but instead he obeyed. And because of his obedience, God made him the father of many nations. Abraham's willingness to obey opened the door to blessings that extended far beyond his lifetime. Obedience is often not about the grand, life-altering decisions, but in the small, everyday choices. It is in the quiet moments when no one is watching when we choose to follow God's commands, even when it's inconvenient, uncomfortable, or unpopular. God sees our hearts, and he honors the times when we choose obedience over our own desires. Even the simple act of choosing to forgive when you've been wronged, to give when you don't have enough, or to serve when it's not easy. These acts of obedience open the door to blessings that are both seen and unseen. There is a power in obedience that moves the heart of God. He is not looking for perfection. He is looking for willing hearts. He is looking for those who will trust him enough to obey even when the outcome is uncertain. And when we obey, he doesn't just bless us in small ways. He blesses us abundantly. The woman with the jar of oil obeyed the prophet's instruction to pour out what little she had, and as a result, her oil multiplied, and she was able to pay off her debts and live in abundance. Her act of obedience to a seemingly small instruction opened the door to provision beyond what she could have imagined. God's blessings are not a reward for perfection, but a reward for obedience. The more we learn to trust God with our actions, the more we unlock His promises. Every step of obedience is a step into the fullness of His purpose for our lives. We often want the blessings, but we don't always want to obey. But God is not withholding blessings from us. He is waiting for us to walk in obedience so that He can pour out blessings we cannot contain. Obedience may require sacrifice. It may challenge us to let go of control, to walk by faith, or to trust in the unseen, but it is in our obedience that we find true freedom, true peace, and true provision. Every door that opens through obedience leads us closer to the abundant life God has prepared for us. We often set limits on God based on our own understanding of what is possible. We measure our dreams and expectations by the standards of the world, and we think in terms of what we can achieve, what we can see, or what seems reasonable to us. But God does not operate within the constraints of our human limitations. His ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts higher than our thoughts. What God has for us is not just good, it is exceedingly abundantly more than we can ask, think, or imagine. When we limit our expectations, we unintentionally restrict God's ability to move in our lives. We settle for what seems attainable, what we believe is within reach. But the God we serve is not a God of just enough. He is a God of overflow. He is the God who turned water into wine, not just any wine, but the best wine. He is the God who fed 5,000 with a boy's lunch and still had leftovers. He is the God who does not meet our needs in small, predictable ways, but in ways that stretch the imagination and blow our minds. God's provision and blessings are not based on what we think we deserve or what we can earn. They are based on His love, His grace, and His ability to exceed anything we could ever envision. When we ask God for something, He doesn't just give us what we ask for, He gives us more, and often it's better than what we expected. Sometimes the very thing we think we need is not the thing that will bless us the most. Our expectations are often limited by our finite understanding, but God sees the bigger picture. What we might perceive as a delay, a setback, or even a disappointment is often God's way of positioning us for something greater. Look at the story of Solomon. When he was given the opportunity to ask God for anything, he didn't ask for wealth, fame, or power. He asked for wisdom. And God, impressed by his request, gave him wisdom beyond measure. But he didn't stop there. He also gave Solomon riches, honor, and peace, making him the most prosperous king to ever rule Israel. Solomon's request was good, but God exceeded his expectations by giving him more than he could have imagined. God's ability to exceed our expectations is rooted in his character. He is a good father, and like any good parent, he desires to bless his children, but unlike earthly parents, God's resources are limitless. He is not restricted by what we have, what we can accomplish, or what seems reasonable in the natural. God doesn't work in a way that makes sense to us. He moves in the realm of the miraculous. He opens doors we never thought possible, leads us to opportunities we never saw coming, and blesses us in ways that leave us speechless. The key to experiencing God's exceeding blessings is not to shrink back from what he promises. It's to have the audacity to believe that he can do far more than we ever imagined. It's to walk in faith, to ask boldly, and to trust that God can do the impossible. When we step out of the realm of the possible and into the realm of faith, we begin to see how God works in ways that go beyond our expectations. God is always at work, even when we can't see it. He is preparing us, aligning circumstances, and orchestrating events in ways we don't understand. When we trust him and refuse to limit what he can do, he shows us that he is the God who does far more than we could ask, think, or imagine.